Thanks for watching and listening to the When Love Leads podcast. You'll be hearing today from some of our special guests as they share with you stories of faith at work. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook and LinkedIn. Now, join us as we explore people of faith at work. Welcome. We are back for another interview on the When Love Leads podcast. I'm Bill Marsh, joined here with our co-host Rick Hasty, and we are delighted today to introduce you to Bill Cooper. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about yourself.
Well, I am married to a wonderful wife. I've got 3 children, 2 in-laws, a daughter-in-law and a son-in-law, and 2 grandkids, 1 on the way, so 3 really, and life's good. I have been experimenting in the business world for a long time, trying to figure out how to not get fired, which has happened 3 times in my career. And maybe just now I'm getting closer to getting all that figured out, but that's a little bit about me.
That's one good reason to work for yourself, isn't it?
Indeed.
Although, as Bill has heard me say before, if you think you got a bad boss, just go to work for yourself.
Exactly. Bill, tell us how you came to faith in Christ.
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I never heard the gospel preached. It went my own way and had a lot of success, but I was empty inside, and the ultimate questions of life really started to haunt me. Things like, why am I here? What's the meaning of life? What's my purpose? Where am I going? Those kinds of things. And I had no answers. And so I would throw myself at work. I was a complete lush in college. So when I finally got a job, I thought, well, I have to sort of prove everybody was wrong about me and make a success of myself. I met with a lot of success, but it was empty and hollow. And I did fall in love with someone I met at Chapel Hill, Laura, and we couldn't make it work. And I had just a terrible breakup, and it was excruciatingly painful. Someone said it's like a divorce without legal fees. And so I went through that, which really put the down thrusters on me. And I poured myself even more into work. And I mean working 80 to 100 hours a week. And at the ripe old age of 25, I discovered that I was burned out, could hardly get out of bed and go to work. And I decided that I would quit my job and go back to business school so I could climb the ladder faster. That's how lost I was. And then before I got to work, I had this epiphany that I would quit early and go hike the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. I went on the trail. I was trying to find myself. It's kind of ironic. And I was also trying to forget about this woman that I was madly in love with but couldn't seem to make it work. And along the way, I started to daydream she would meet me on the final mountain in Maine, and whatever was wrong with her would somehow get fixed, and we could live happily ever after. Long story short, she called me the day I summited Mount Katahdin in Maine and trying to get in touch with me, and we finally did get together. She shared the gospel with me. She had gotten converted while I was on the trail. I ended up being instrumental in my coming to Christ, and I ended up marrying that woman. So it's a wonderful story.
Well, I was thinking as you were saying that, Bill, that she was hoping you would be a changed man at the end of that hike.
Yeah, I know, but I've been trying to prove to her ever since that really it was all her that needed to change. And I haven't met with much success. That's great.
Well, Bill, talk to us a little bit about your faith walk then over the years. You gave us a great story there, and what a joy it is to hear how Christ does take us just right where we are. What has your faith walk been like since that time?
Yes, I would say more and more is the key phrase. When I started out, I was pretty zealous and pretty arrogant, frankly, in the workplace. And I ended up going to my first job and setting, I think, all the power brokers in this organization. The CEO later told me, he said, you had great ideas, but I couldn't get them enacted because you had offended everybody so much. And so I got fired, and that was really wonderful. It's not something, I'd like to go through again, but I spent 14 months kind of in the desert, underemployed or unemployed, and God really dealt with me and humbled me. Then, ironically, I went back and asked forgiveness of those power brokers, and I just did it because it was a conviction I had, and lo and behold, they ended up hiring me back. And it was a great run the second go round. And I would say increasingly, as I grew in my faith and my understanding of God's word, that I became a better employee. So I think I really began to see my role as to love God and love others in the marketplace. And it took on different manifestations, but I quit using people as objects to further my own success and saw them as people that I could come alongside and love and serve and hopefully give an opportunity to give a defense for the hope that was within me more and more. In God's providence, I ended up in a division of a technology company. And how I got into these technology companies, I'll never know because I was never a technologist, but there seemed to be a dearth of leadership, and so I would get drafted into these organizations to run them, and things didn't go well in this particular case, and there were a couple of technologists that wanted to run the business the way they wanted, not a way that I thought would make money for the owners, and we disagreed that they wouldn't let me move them on, and so we ended up having to do things their way, and we lost a whole lot of money, and it ended up in my getting fired. God's providence, I was able to come back and buy that company and do all the things that I told the owners I thought we should do.
What stage was this in your life? Where were you age-wise at this point?
So this was 23 years ago. Yeah, that was the greatest experience I'd had, obviously, to that point in my career, and it was very difficult. I could tell you a lot of stories. I hope to write a book one day about some of those stories, but the Reader's Digest version is we had 6 Scud missiles aimed at us and 2 Patriots in the storehouse to take them out of the sky. Any one of those Scud missiles would have taken us out and probably taken me out financially. Matter of fact, I believe Bill Marsh, it was you one time sitting around a fire that told me that a person's not a real entrepreneur until they've not only sweated a payroll or 2, but could lose their house. And that all came home to me in many ways during that period of time. But
well, let's stay there for a minute, Bill. In the context that you've just described of having a lot of potential challenges, where was God in all of that?
Well, he was right there with me, taking me through. I was reading this morning in Genesis about Jacob and just talking about how God was there when he was in distress, never left him and delivered him. And that was very apparent to me through the whole thing. Not only did he deliver us time and time again, but he gave me the grace to persevere through a very difficult season of trials. And it was such long odds from a worldly perspective that when it became apparent to our lawyers that we had turned the corner, they actually took me to lunch and said, collectively, we've got over 150 years of business experience that we've never seen anything that comes close to this. Yeah, so God be praised for that. That was his doing, not mine, that's for sure.
What were they observing, Bill, that was so unusual?
Well, one thing I think was the fact that we just could hang in there and keep everybody together and persevere. I think that's one thing. I've heard stories of the FedEx startup, and I think in some ways our startup rivals that, maybe even exceeds it to some degree. And I think when you see things like that, you realize that that's not natural. We had a situation where we had a lawsuit but no money to bring it. Instead, I just wanted to know the truth. I actually wrote an oath that I wanted the potential defendants to all sign, and then I wouldn't consider a lawsuit. I think that whole process was different. I don't think the lawyers had ever dealt with that kind of thing before, but it was these were Christians professing Christians had lied and done all kinds of things they shouldn't have done. And just the way that I was trying to approach it, I think made a difference.
And why did you take that approach? Why not file a lawsuit?
Well, part of it was the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's what I would have wanted them to do to me. And I just really wanted to try to get to the truth. I owed money for a payment for the business. And if it was clear that they hadn't engaged in any foul play, then I wanted to make sure to pay it. But I just was trying to get to the truth.
What was the outcome?
Well, we ended up paying it anyway, and they wouldn't sign the oath that I wrote. Another hard lesson in the marketplace.
Bill, the truth of the scriptures, we say that it isn't that these things work, therefore they're true, but they're true, therefore they work. And I'm curious, as you have been shepherding an adult son in his business journey, and as you have been working with him, who's 30 years behind you in this process, what kinds of enduring lessons have you wanted to make sure you?
That's a great question. Well, I've started with telling him most of the mistakes I've made. I haven't had time to tell him all of the mistakes I made, but I tried to teach him by my own failures to some degree. He's way beyond me in terms of lots of things. I'd like to think he's standing on my shoulders to some degree, and me being sort of a first generation Christian in our family, and so he had the benefit of that, but he was way more mature than I was at his age. I think the thing I've tried to stress with him is to build a business to the glory of God. And what does that look like? I remember asking our first pastor before I bought the company, I said, I really want to build a business to the glory of God. And just how do I do that? And they quoted this monk named Martin Luther. They said, go make a good shoe and sell it for a fair price. And I love that story, but that's how you love your neighbor. So I've tried to inculcate that mindset in my son, that everything you do all to the glory of God, and to make sure that you integrate your business practice with your faith at every point. Which is easier said than done. It takes time to do that. It's a work in process. So he's on that path, and it's really glorious to see him embarking on that journey.
Bill, what are the friction points? What have you found to have been the friction points where, in some situations, it's really easy to be consistent in your faith and in your work, but then there are other places that it's hard, and that may vary by industry. It may vary by your role in an organization. I'm just curious the times you found it difficult to walk consistently with the Lord, and how you saw him provide in those situations.
I think the hardest parts were when we were doing really well in terms of my spiritual life. It's easy to not feel your sense of your need for Christ as much when things are going really well. I mentioned the early trials of the startup, but there were multiple trials along the way. But it was during those times that especially the Psalms really just came alive for me. I felt not only my need for Christ more keenly, but his presence more fully. And so those were great times. So there's always pressure, at least in my experience in the business world, especially when you couple large sums of money with decision making. There's always a temptation to compromise, and no one would know. God would know. That's all that matters, really. But lots of temptations in the marketplace, which to me, for a Christian, that's sort of the front lines of ministry, difficult as it is.
Can you describe a time, Bill, where you felt like you were really, really tempted to do the wrong thing, and maybe you did choose to do the wrong thing, or maybe it was an opportunity to overcome that? Is there any particular point in time that comes to mind?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. Probably the biggest one with the biggest price tag attached to it was when we started up, I came up with a pretty creative compensation plan, and our people were going to basically function as a bank, and if we couldn't pay them everything that month, we would roll the balance forward and hopefully catch them up the next month or two, and in exchange for that, give them equity in the business. But I never got a lawyer to look at it, and things didn't go as my pro forma projected, even my worst case, and ended up having to lay off over half the company over a weekend, and it was terrible. And Monday morning, we were a virtual company. I went to this virtual office where the receptionist told me that the sheriff was looking for me, and they were serving me a summons, and it was one of those employees who was suing me for the balance that was owed. And that's the first time the lawyers ever saw the agreement that I wrote. And long story short, after chastising me for not coming to them so they could give me the language I needed, they told me my odds of fighting it and winning were 50-50. And if I lost, it was treble damages plus attorney's fees. And we had, at that point, negative working capital in the business. So we were upside down, and I was forced to settle with this person. And even though the agreement was clear, everybody knew the risk. But when I did that, I felt like I had a moral obligation to do the same thing for everybody else. And it amounted to about $400,000 of promissory notes that I gave people with, again, at that point, with negative working capital in the business. And I had no idea how we would ever pay that back. But I knew that was the right thing to do, so we did it. Praise God, in the end of 2004, we had a tremendous year, and we were able to pay everybody back and still make a nice profit. It was pretty amazing how he delivered us. There was another time where we had an unconditional guarantee on our professional services, and a good client had just given us a bill of materials and told us to order it, and we did, and the stuff they put together didn't work. And we spent countless hours sending engineers to Tennessee to their plant to try to help salvage this thing. And I think we had charged them $40-some thousand services, but it wasn't working. We probably put $80,000 in free services trying to salvage the deal. And I finally reached out and said to the CEO, I think we owe you your money back. He never asked for it. But I said, our fault was we should have checked your configuration, and we didn't do that, and we failed you. And so here's your money. And I sent him a credit for the $40-some thousand. I can't remember. And it was really pretty sweet. He said, that right there is why we do business with your company. So that was rewarding and costly. But we didn't make that mistake again.
I'm curious, as you're sitting here now, let's call it 20 years later, and you think about those moments, what would you pass on to a young entrepreneur trying to make a decision like this?
I would say look to Christ, make principled decisions, and trust him for the outcome, even when you can't see a way. That's part of our walk. We walk by faith and not by sight, and do the right thing. It was sort of cliche today, but I think if you do that, at some point, it's funny, I said, Lord, if you'll deliver us from this business, I'll give you the praise and, the rest of my days, as long as I have breath. And then I read a John Piper book and realized that it was a wrong request. Just, maybe the Lord was going to use me to show the world what a Christian looks like when his business goes out of business and burns down all around him. So I think something along those lines is what I would encourage someone, a younger person, to look to do. God can be glorified in all sorts of ways, not just with success. It's often through failure. Don't be afraid of the failure. Just seek the Lord and his honor and put him first in everything. And then it's like, I think the Proverbs, the horse is prepared for battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. And just always keeping that in mind.
Our subtitle here is People of Faith at Work, Bill. And so we talk about faith a good bit. And obviously in the Christian world, we talk about faith a lot. I think that's often a misnomer, however, in the sense that, or let's say misdefined, in that we think that some people think of faith as magic. As you think about faith at work, do you see it as magic, or do you see it as a result of what you've observed God doing in your life?
It's definitely not magic. I don't see it as magic. I see it as really a manifestation of trust. Yeah, I think, and obviously faith is built on, it's strengthened by seeing God's faithfulness to you. That's certainly the case. But even without that, we have his word, and it's sure and it's trustworthy. And whatever he says in his word, we can count on. Even when things don't look that way. I mean, I can tell you so many times that the Lord delivered us, and if you had asked me to tell you 100 ways that it could happen, they never would have entered that list. Is that magic? No, but that's God's wonderful providence. And I think he often lets us exhaust all the means we can see just so he can deliver us in ways that we can't see. And then we know for sure who did it and who gets the glory.
Like my favorite book on marriage, When Sinners Say I Do, the workplace is full of sinners bumping into each other. What wisdom you have in applying biblical wisdom to hard relational situations in the workplace, perhaps difficult coworker, perhaps when you've had to make a change in an organization because there's just not a fit or there's not alignment. What have you learned about the scriptures and God and how to love people in really hard situations?
Well, you don't have to look far for conflict when you get two sinners together, that's for sure. The thing that stands out to me is biblical peacemaking or conflict resolution. You know, the beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Ken Sande wrote a great book called The Peacemaker, and it's full of great tools and teaching around what that means. But I think being quick to go to someone when they have sinned against you, or if you know they have something against you, go to them, keeping short accounts. All that's really important to eliminating the conflict and resolving the conflict that's inevitable in the marketplace. So I think the Bible is a great source of wisdom there and instruction as it relates to having to make the difficult decision about terminating someone's employment. That's never easy. If it ever gets easy, I used to tell people you need to get out of leading and managing people because something's wrong. And yet it can be done with compassion and real dignity. The key is really citing someone's giftedness, you know, how God has gifted them, especially when you don't have a place for them to put those gifts to work. And you really owe it to them to help them find a place where they can, because they deserve that. There's real dignity in that. And we got better at eliminating hiring mistakes, but still you're going to make them. Our turnover was 15%. It meant an industry which was really a lot higher than that, but that's still 15%. Too much, you know, and you guys probably saw the movie Chariots of Fire, but when we would interview people for a position, I would cite Eric Liddell on that Alpine meadow with his sister, questioning why he was playing around in these Olympic Games. And he grabs up in his arms and he says, Jenny, you don't understand. God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his favor. And so that was always a question in our interviews is, where do you feel God's favor? In other words, where did he, and how did he gift you, and how you feel his favor when you put those gifts to work. So when we made a hiring mistake, we missed it, and we helped people. A lot of times we would go to them and just say, this isn't working out. Can you take the next 3 months to try to find a better fit before we have to take other actions? And a lot of times they would, and it really worked out great.
Bill, you're definitely not at the end of your career. You got more road ahead of you. How would you say you feel God's pleasure now? What is it that you do that brings that sense of his pleasure?
I really do love developing people and being sort of a behind-the-scenes leader and coach. I've really enjoyed coaching executives and CEOs and just helping them through with the experience I've been blessed to have, and I've got a lot of scars to prove it. It's just very rewarding to see the light come on for someone or see them work through a really difficult situation and know that you had a hand in that and were able to help in some way. I have no designs on retirement per se, so I don't really actually believe in retirement. I hope to be able to do this with health and vigor for a long time.
One question I have for you is, do you think you learned more over the years from failures or from success?
Well, we definitely learned from success, but what led to the success was a lot of failures. I would have to say more from failure. I know there's a great Spurgeon quote. It's something like, I owe more to the hammer and the file than any other tool in my Lord's workshop. When my schoolroom is darkened, I see most. Adversity is a great teacher.
Our good Father prunes the vine. And we don't prune the vine because it's sickly, not normally, but we prune the vine so that it would grow and become more mature and more fruitful. We don't like to be pruned, but if we're not pruned, it's pretty difficult to ever become a fruitful vine.
Yeah, there's also that passage in Hebrews that God disciplines those he loves, and And that discipline yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. So,
with many of those thoughts in mind, Bill, if you were looking back and saying, boy, here's one thing I wish I hadn't done, is there something that comes to mind?
boy, yeah, I have a lot of regrets. One of them was just an oversight. We had someone who, unbeknownst to me, had Parkinson's disease and never told me. And when we started up, I delegated all the benefits to the wife of one of our employees who was skilled at that and never followed up, and assumed we had a short and long-term disability, only to find out that this person never got it. Then this person with Parkinson's disease began to get worse, and then came and said they were going to have to go on disability, and I went to look for the policy, and it wasn't there, and it was devastating.
Did you say there's a lesson to be learned there?
I think so, and it's two-way. That person had a responsibility to make sure that they communicated that, and I understand why they didn't. But the other thing is really just inspecting what you expect. I think the biggest thing I wish I had done differently was in the beginning of my career. I worked for a wonderful Christian CEO, but I was a brand new Christian, and I was judgmental and arrogant, and that's the one that ended up having me fired. I wish I had learned and been more humble in that situation. That's really helped me, I think, in the intervening time between then and now to be more curious and to seek more perspective.
Well, there is one thing I think that is certainly true, and that is that humility will just come. It's not something you necessarily have to seek. That just pay attention, and we'll learn humility by the journey that we're on.
That's true.
I think humility is one of those things that reminds me of a fellow I listened to on a podcast, and one of the little tags he has sometimes is, and now hear from a guy who just always has to seem to learn things the hard way.
You can humble yourself, or God will do it for you. That's for sure.
Indeed. Indeed.
Well, Bill, you've been really, really kind with your time and your stories, and yet we could go on, and we want to go on, but we're going to say thank you for all of your time and your stories and your truth, how kind you are to share both the challenges and the victories. We are very, very grateful for your friendship, too. Anything you would just like to add as we're closing?
Yeah, I would say the greatest prophet, the prophet John the Baptist, and he said, I must decrease that he increase. I think that's the thing, that this journey, that we're on, that's the lesson, is that more and more we need to be diminished, and he needs to become all in all. That's a process. It's painfully slow, but it is sure. He gets the job done, and to cooperate with him and welcome his chastisement and his discipline. And I just think that's the way up is the way down, as the Puritans would say. So that would be my parting comment. I think I'm a poster child for doing things a lot of times all the wrong way, and running into walls and bringing lots of self-inflicted pain on myself, and God using that and rolling that into the pavement of my sanctification, and using it for his glory. So, here I am. I'm his workmanship, and he's going to see to it that we accomplish everything that he has for us. Praise the Lord for that.
You've got a rich history, and we want to hear more from you on that, but we'll do that another time. We really appreciate your time today, Bill.
Thank you, Rick. It's been an honor to be with you.
Thanks for watching and listening. Don't forget to click the like button on your app. You can find more episodes like this at our website, whenloveleads.com. While there, you can also sign up for our newsletter, where we explore many of these topics deeper, and be the first to hear about upcoming podcast topics and guests. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Finally, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Until next time, remember the difference it makes when love leads. Thanks for watching and listening. Don't forget to click the like button on your app. You can find more episodes like this at our website, whenloveleads.com. While there, you can also sign up for our newsletter, where we explore many of these topics deeper, and be the first to hear about upcoming podcast topics and guests. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Finally, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Until next time, remember the difference it makes when love leads.